Why don't you start by saying why you decided to research and write Forever Prisoner?
The reason we decided to research and write Forever Prisoner was the story of Abu Zabaydah, who was the first high-value detainee captured by the CIA in Pakistan in 2002. We told a little bit about that story in our previous book called The Exile, about Osama bin Laden, but we could never really get to the truth or the bottom of Abu Zubaydah's story. There just seemed to be a lot of very badly written books out there which regurgitated CIA lies.
What did the CIA and the American government, the White House, say about Abu Zubaydah?
When he was captured in Faisalabad, Pakistan, 6 months after 9/11, his capture was, I think, one senior administration official described it as being like the liberation of Paris in World War II. The Americans went absolutely crazy, publicised it as much as they could, and they said he was number 3 in Al-Qaeda, he was a senior lieutenant to Osama bin Laden, he was a planner and a financier of 9/11, and most importantly, he knew about the second wave of attacks that the CIA kept telling the president were coming, possibly nuclear. And so they had to interrogate him extremely harshly to get to the truth, to save American lives.
And what happened to Abu Zubaydah in captive? He's sometimes known as patient zero. What's he the patient zero of?
Because the CIA span this story that he knew about another wave of attacks about to hit America, they also said that the only way to get him talking was to treat him extremely harshly. And they dreamed up something called enhanced interrogation, which is basically a euphemism for torture. It took them many, many months to get legal approval to put Abu Zubaydah through this program of torture. And some of the worst aspects of it included waterboarding, which I think most people are now familiar with, mock burial, where you're put in a coffin and buried literally in the ground with bits of mud clumped on top of you, which was not actually authorised in the end, and being hit, your head hit repeatedly against a wall until you collapsed, basically. It was a horrendous litany of 12 techniques which had actually been partially used in US military survival school, but only ever on students who had medical checks beforehand, only ever for a couple of minutes, and they were checked again afterwards, and they knew it was a training exercise.
How long was he tortured for?
Abu Zabaydah was taken into custody on March 28, 2002, and he's still in custody. In fact, he's now in Guantanamo. He's never been charged with a crime. He was in CIA custody and was being tortured officially for the first 8 months of his detention. He was held in black sites. His family didn't know that he was alive until he turned up in Guantanamo 4.5 years later in 2006.
Where was he moved? Can you tell us a little about the secret journey of Abu Zubaydah as a prisoner?
Abu Zabaydah was captured in Faisalabad, Pakistan, with the connivance of the Pakistani ISI, who sold his location to the American government for 10 million. He was then flown to Thailand to a secret, what they call a black site, which is basically a house in the jungle north of Chiang Mai. He was held there until December 2002, and that was where he suffered his worst torture, including all the waterboarding. He was then moved along with other prisoners because people had found out that possibly there was a CIA detention facility in Thailand, so they shifted everyone to Poland into an old villa in the middle of a forest, and they kept, the CIA kept Abu Zubaydah and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and various other high-value detainees there until that too was revealed, and then they moved all around the world several times via Afghanistan, Lithuania, Morocco, and eventually Guantanamo.
Did Abu Zubaydah plan 9/11?
Abu Zabaydah knew nothing about 9/11 until it happened, like everybody else, and we know that because we've corresponded with him in great detail, and he has been consistent in his answers, and his answers are also backed up by a diary that was captured with him, which tells exactly the same story, which is he was a jihad facilitator for young men wanting to go and train in Afghanistan, He was not known to Osama bin Laden, although some people who went through his camp went on to join Al-Qaeda. He eventually met Osama bin Laden in the year 2000 after bin Laden had Abu Zubaydah's training camp closed because he was jealous because they were getting more recruits and more money. He knew nothing about 9/11. He did not fund or finance 9/11, and everything that the CIA accused him of, they later took away from his docket, his charge sheet. And in fact, his charge sheet is empty because he's never been charged.
So why is Abu Zubaydah, who committed no crimes and wasn't in Al-Qaeda and didn't plan 9/11, why is he not a free man?
Abu Zubaydah is not a free man because the CIA interrogators obtained a written and verbal agreement before they started torturing him that he would be held incommunicado for the remainder of his life, because they could not get what they call declination of prosecution, which means you basically have a get out of jail card. So the interrogators said, we won't do what we're planning to do to him unless you promise us that he will never see the light of day again. And that's why he's still held more than 20 years later.
So he's being held in prison not for the crimes that he's committed, but so that he does not give testimony about what the CIA did. Is that right?
Yes, he has not committed any crimes. He's being held in prison, as we said in the film version of The Forever Prisoner, because of what the Americans did to him, not because of anything he did to America or the West.
And finally, tell us about all of the amazing paper trail and human primary source interviews that crop up in the book, because it's one of the things that distinguishes it from anything else written on in the field, really.
Well, like I said at the beginning, one of the reasons we wanted to write this book was because there was so much rubbish out there, which didn't even sound credible. And when we started corresponding with Abu Zabaydah in Guantanamo, which is not legal, but we managed to do it for a course of 5 years, he started revealing that practically everything that's ever been written about anything connected to 9/11 is actually not correct, or has been skewed, or has been changed for political reasons. So we wanted to go back to the original sources. So I knocked on the door of James Mitchell, who was the primary enhanced interrogator employed by the CIA. I interviewed George Tennant, who was the director of the CIA and the head of the counter-terror. We tried to get to as many people as possible, and we also went through various FOIA, Freedom of Information Act actions to get thousands and thousands of CIA documents declassified, which helped to tell the true story.
But in the process of this, it's fair to say also that the production that we were a part of, we sued the CIA, took them and the White House to court to get documents unredacted. Tens of thousands of these documents were then used and pieced together for the book, and you got to people who have never given interviews before, both within the intelligence community from around the world, Pakistan, India, America, of course, and Europe.
Yes, and in fact the documents are still coming. I mean, the process is not finished. We recently got a document which had been redacted several times by the CIA, which was an account of Abu Zabaydah speaking at Guantanamo, and they'd redacted this one word over and over again, and we finally got the CIA to unredact or reveal the word, and it was an account of the second interrogator going to see Abu Zabaydah in 2006 and saying, sorry, we got the wrong person, we thought you were this, and now you're not.
Just finally,
literally the word sorry that they'd redacted.
There's some interesting dimensions for people who live in South Asia. Where did Abu Zubaydah go to university, for example?
He has a very long and strong connection to South Asia. So he's a Palestinian refugee. He grew up in Saudi Arabia, where you can't go to university as a refugee unless there are only like 3 or 4 subjects. So he came to Mysore in India, and he studied computer engineering and computer science, I think, at university in Mysore. And he was there for 2 years and travelled all around India and went to a whole list, Calcutta, Bombay, everywhere. I mean, he travelled a lot. And then he decided that as he said, he was going nowhere with his studies and he couldn't think of what to do with his life, so he decided to go for jihad training because he was very upset about what was happening in Palestine to what he calls his people. So he crossed over the border at Ankara on the train and got the train all the way up to Peshawar, and then went in the back of a truck to the camps in Afghanistan, and by which time his Saudi paperwork had run out, so he couldn't go home. So he was then stuck in Pakistan for the next decade, trying to get out.
And what do we learn about the ISI in relation to Abu Zubaydah's story and Pakistan in particular? He's got a very interesting relationship with the ISI.
Well, Abu Zabaydah would say that he tried to stay away from the ISI as much as possible, and there were quite a few times in the mid-90s when he was running a guest house in Peshawar where he was picked up by the Peshawar police and the ISI and interrogated because they wanted to find out who was the emir, the prince of the guest house, and he made all sorts of silly stories about why it wasn't him. The only time he really came together with the ISI was when Lashkar-e-Toiba wanted to facilitate the training offered in the camps that he ran. He was not in the camp, but he kind of ran the camp and funded the camp. And so he allowed people who were training to go and fight in Kashmir to go and train at Khaldan camp in Afghanistan. And his only other major connection to ISI was when, after 9/11, after the American invasion of Afghanistan, he was helped, and many other Al-Qaeda people were helped by Lashkar-e-Toiba to get into Pakistan and into safe houses. But in the end, he was then betrayed by Lashkar-e-Toiba, who told the ISI where he was, and like I said before, they received $10 million from the American government, who was desperate to find anybody they could turn into a high-value detainee because Osama bin Laden had gone missing.
Do you know what the ISI did with the reward money from America?
I believe that the ISI built a new headquarters at Ankara in Islamabad with the money that came from Abu Zubaydah's capture.